I'm Steve Banowski. I'm organizer for the Colorado Mountain Club Denver Group's conservation program. I joined the club 39 years ago tomorrow, in June 8th, 1982. Went to my first conservation meeting the next month, and I've been working hard at it ever since, and also involved in the broad-based Colorado conservation community and various and sundry stuff. I also work with and for Julie, tracking Colorado Parks and Wildlife, State Trails Committee, and at least I note when the State Land Board comes up with their monthly agenda. I hesitate to look at it because they average around 140 pages with all their handouts, and who's got time for that? So our format for a meeting is that we have a speaker or a panel first. We started doing this back in early 2019, and it seemed to work well. We went to Zoom and virtual because of the COVID. Right. And I'm thinking, and Julie, I think you and I chatted a little about this. We'll probably continue with the quarterly meetings being virtual, simply because we can get speakers like Steve Johnson from Telluride. Last year, we had a fellow from Bozeman, Montana, talking about renaming Mount Evans with the Wilderness Society. And a couple meetings ago, we had a speaker from Santa Fe, New Mexico. So we're able to get these distant speakers who wouldn't necessarily drive a lot of hours just to get to Golden. And so the format is the panel tonight, and then Julie will give some updates, and we'll have a few local updates. I'll be happy to answer questions. Just about everybody on the call tonight is an activist for Denver conservation one way or another. I know Whitney does most of her work now for Boulder conservation. Their gain is our loss, but it all goes for the same cause of the Colorado Mountain Club, so we're happy with that. And Sandy Heiss, I hope I said your last name right. Sandy is our liaison from the Denver Group Council or Board, and I think that's Janet Farrar who just popped in. So, all right, that's enough for my mouth for a while. And Julie, I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thanks, Steve. Hey everyone, I'm Julie Mock. I'm the Conservation Director for the Colorado Mountain Club. I'm based down in Salida, obviously working statewide on advocacy and stewardship work. And yeah, excited to see you all here tonight. Thanks for joining. We are recording this meeting, and like Steve said, we're gonna run through a panel to talk about kind of 14er access. We did a similar sort of panel focused on the DeCalibron Peaks last summer, but it's always timely, I think, this time of year to look at some of these access issues as we're thinking about where we're going to recreate on public lands this summer. And so we have two guest speakers who are going to talk to us about some specific access issues and areas where they've really been focused and working on for the last number of years, in some cases close to decades or maybe more, on these issues that, again, you know, are helping to promote and facilitate outdoor recreation in some of these neat areas. So I'm going to kick it over to Steve Johnson first. He's going to talk to us about some issues surrounding Wilson Peak. And Steve, I'll let you do an introduction because I'm sure you'll do a way better job than I will. And then, yeah, give us, you know, kind of an overview of the work you've done down there. And then we'll have some time, a short amount of time for questions for Steve when he's done, and then we'll move on to our next speaker. Steve, I'll turn it to you.
And Julie, how long approximately do
I don't know, 5 to 8 minutes, somewhere in that realm, and then we'll leave a couple minutes for questions.
Sure. Well, I got to Telluride as in a roundabout way. Grew up in New Jersey, went to Lake City Outward Bound School at age 16. Knew I'd be back here someday. And I made it out of Colorado College, having met some good climbers, including Ed Webster and Steve Hong, and actually instructed a CMC rock climbing course at 11 Mile Canyon while a CC Tiger. Went to CU Law, continued climbing with Hong, and graduated into the recession of 80-81. Ended up having a special district law firm position terminated, and found a job with the Assistant Public Works Director in City of Grand Junction, moved out, learned about utilities and backcountry, and became an Assistant Mesa County Attorney, and the Telluride Town Attorney position opened up with the mining lawsuit on the horizon with the Superfund claims against Idorado Mining Company and Newmont. And 6 years later, after settling that case, which notably included agreement to establish the first public recreational ice climbing easement in the country on Bridalveil Falls, I went into private practice and continued my advocacy. At about that time, I became Telluride Mountain Club president and worked on the Free Bear Creek Reopen Gold Hill campaign, which was rather opposed by the ski area at the time, but ultimately we got Forest Supervisor approval to reestablish some of the side country access that had been enjoyed, and which is now a primary marketing message for the ski area. I got involved with the Access Fund when I moved to Telluride. I befriended Charlie Fowler, notable alpinist and mountaineer, and continued to do a lot of climbing with him, and had some of my best climbs with him. And partly because I was never as good a climber as some of my compatriots, but I had legal tools available to me, I got very interested in public access issues for climbing and mountaineering. And after the Bridalveil victory, was appointed regional coordinator for the Access Fund and served for Southwest Colorado for, I think, over 2 decades, which included 2 stints on their national board and chairing their 2 main committees, external policy, which is public lands, and loans and acquisitions. I think it was during the late, this is like 15, 20 years ago. And I only had a chance to scan the materials that I forwarded. You might want to bring up perhaps the map first, if you could, Julie. Thank you very much. All right, so what we had going on was an individual named Rusty Nichols, a Texan and a former sheriff, who decided to buy up a bunch of mining claims in the Silver Peak Basin area, which is shown basically Silver Peak. If you looked to the upper left side of the map, that's the basin. And all those private properties were privately owned mining claims. Nichols was very aggressive in his acquisitions. He visited a widow within a week of her husband dying, bought up these claims, and then started making the motions that he was going to start mining in this area. And also announced that there's a public closure to any public access across his mining claims, even though these are very old and ancient trails up there, including Indian trails up and out of Navajo Basin and into Silver Peak, and so forth. But he effectively controlled the Rock of Ages Ridge and the Southwest Ridge approach to Wilson Peak. He began harassing climbers and people who were parked at a gate that he erected with the agreement of the county, which did not want to maintain the road up to the Silver Peak Mill, which is not really shown on this map. But and he began harassing people, telling them they either couldn't go in or they'd have to pay him $100 fee. Telluride, I was no longer president of Telluride Mountain Club, so I addressed this issue from the standpoint of the Access Fund, although it was more of a peripheral issue and probably more in the domain of the American Alpine Club and Colorado Mountain Club. One of the things we wanted to do was establish exactly where his claims were located. Steve, if you recall, I think you co-authored a grant application to the Access Fund to help co-fund a survey of a number of these peaks. And part of that survey ended up being a BLM cadastral survey. He and the greenwashers at Trust for Public Land claimed that Nichols controlled the access to the summit. And through the cadastral survey, we disproved that. Furthermore, I found the road petition for a road that goes from the highway near Fall Creek to the Silver Pick Mill, and established that that had been a public road, a county road paid for by the county, and took that petition to the Board of County Commissioners and persuaded them to declare that they still had an interest and had not abandoned the Silver Pick Road to the Silver Pick Mill. The Rock House ruins, I think, if I'm correct, those are right by the Silver Pick Mill. I think that could be mislabeled. And that is actually not on private property, or a portion of it is, but the road to it, just to the right, is still in the public domain. And we established that there was direct access from the Silver Pick Mill straight up the west face. And in fact, Charlie Fowler and I advocated to the commissioners and said, look, you know, let's not be ransomed here by this fella. He does control the southwest ridge, but we have an equally good access up the west face. It's a little loose at the top, but as Charlie said, it's safer because it's a quicker approach and it's quicker descent. And I did it a few times with him. Within 3 months of the commissioner's announcement, Nichols settled with the Trust for Public Land and conveyed his properties to them, but with some stipulations and conditions on their reconveyance to the Forest Service. And the primary one was that there would be no more public use up to the private cabin, which happened to be also the training location for the search and rescue group that I had been part of. But it was also because of that, the sheriff that we asked to enforce the false imprisonment claims of multiple hikers, sheriff would not enforce that. So anyway, the result is, you can't see it on this map, but the new access to Wilson Peak is from the adjoining basin to the west, known as Elk Creek Basin. And now it's a longer drive, but the road's been improved. You have an extra mile of hiking and an extra 1,000 feet of elevation in both directions than the traditional access. But it's a very workable trail. You can see it coming in around near where the word Silver Pick are located. It's right up at or above timberline, and then you just climb the route the traditional way, whether you want to do west or southwest ridge or the west face. And in fact, from the stop sign area, if any of you want a real adventure up on Wilson Peak, the northwest ridge, which is the longest ridge on the peak, is well worth doing. It probably only has one 40-foot section of run out 5.7. I want to take, so anyway, I think our advocacy helped. I was very disappointed with, at the time, our local Telluride Mountain Club, which was spending excessive time negotiating with Nichols, trying to establish a new route that would go up to a 13er on the ridge to the west of the Rock of Ages saddle, and then traverse along a long lightning-prone ridge just to get over to the regular southwest ridge route. Nevertheless, and I advocated, for a more aggressive approach that basically said, hey, we've got public prescriptive rights. These claims have been traveled without objection and without permission for years. And, let's go ahead and establish it that way. But we got the tools together. We did a lot of public education. Julie, you could bring up maybe my guest commentary, if you would. I think it was key that we went to the county commissioners and established their claim to the road, and that climbers could still reach the summit of the peak without Nichols' permission. Be damned. We harassed them in certain ways. legally though. And an accountant and his girlfriend were one of the people that Nichols blocked off with his truck and brandished his gun in front of. And she was crying and so forth, and basically extorted $100 access fee from them. And so we ended up making a complaint to the Department of Revenue that he was not claiming this income on his state tax. We did other things such as this public commentary to kind of embarrass the landowner and set the record straight on what the actual public access was, and to address the potential threat from the mining to the local watershed. So, it was invaluable that we had the Trust for Public Land to play a pivotal role in the acquisition. But I did want to point out the greenwash that occurred when one of their representatives was claiming, contrary to the mining claim map and the BLM cadastral survey, that Nichols owned the peak, and we had to deal with him in order to, resume public access. And that just wasn't true. So never overstate your case, do your research, consider all angles of attack. If you got a wealthy donor, you can consider a quiet title claim to establish prescriptive high access rights. Now, you're not going to get them over, you'll get those over the private property. But the question was, we had a Forest Service that was not willing to challenge Nichols closures and pretty much sat back and waited for the TPL deal to come through. I like to think that our advocacy to the county that there was an existing public road, and their decision to confirm that claim led quickly to the settlement with TPL. And that pretty much covers Wilson Peak. I would like to take a moment though. Let's see, I don't have a picture up, but I don't know how many of you have done Wilson Peak since the relocated access has been done. But the basin to the west is Elk Creek Basin. And towering above that is a 13er, which is now known as Fowler Peak. And basically, after a lengthy campaign by my part, with support from the Mountain Club and the Access Fund. You won't see it on this map. Let's see. Well, it's hidden by the Silver Peak Road legend. It's right up in that area. But it's a prominent peak. It's a great 13er. You go where the new trail from Elk Creek Basin occurs, and then switch back north back into Silver Peak. You just kind of climb straight up some old hiking trails and above timberline and into some of the most dangerous rocky terrain that I've ever been on. And that says a lot because I've done all the 14ers. But we got up through that basin and went along the ridge, and there's a little 5-7 section, and that gets Fowler Peak. We did that through congressional action. We wanted to honor Charlie's passing in Tibet along with his partner, Chris Boskoff. And we decided under the U.S. Geographical Name Board that we had to wait 5 years and establish that he had significant contacts with the state. We felt we could do that. But as 5 years got close, I noticed that they have a policy against designating features in wilderness areas after humans. But I felt that in this case, an exception could and should be made, as we have Wilson Peak, we have Gladstone Peak, we have a couple others nearby. And we thought it would be great to commemorate Charlie and Chris through a peak naming proposal. So we went to Senator Udall, who we knew was a mountaineer, and he originally backed the deal, didn't get reelected. His staffer continued to work with Senator Bennett, supported our effort. We had to go through multiple efforts to get letters of support from San Miguel and Dolores counties, which boundaries are right along the ridge line. The Boskoff Peak is easily visible from Woods Lake, and is a great 3.5 hour hike and scramble at the top. Fowler Peak does involve a little bit of technical climbing and fourth class or a quick rope for a wrap in one section. But we were pleased to be able to get that passed through, ultimately with support of Senator Wyden from, I think it's Oregon, where Charlie's sister lived, and one other senator who had some staff with major contacts with the American Alpine Club. So for some damn reason, I worked on that, and we got it done, and it was the first congressionally designated peak naming that has ever occurred in Colorado. So I'm pretty much done my public lands access work at this point, although I'll pitch in where I can if there's a significant need. I feel like having just enjoyed working with people like Steve Banowski and heading up local mountaineering organizations, and then going national with my attempts to establish access to climbing areas, including peaks, that it's been just a very enjoyable career. And I've learned that I could, use some of my legal skills and organizational skills, although they're not up to today's generations, to help the access situation keep on going. So I guess you can take this down now. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Steve. Do we have questions for Steve? You can either, I think there are a few of us enough to just take yourself off of mute, or you can throw a question in the chat and I can answer or ask those of Steve.
Well, I just hope that you keep fighting for access everywhere it's needed. I understand there's some issues with Lincoln Democrat and Bros, and that's an area that I went to in November of 1973, my third month in college. I went up to an old mining shack and in the snow climbed the 3 peaks the next day. It's too bad to hear that that's been a hassle. So
yeah, we're working on it for sure, and we'll have some updates on that tonight too.
Right.
Any questions for Steve? Oh, is the landowner commencing any mining operations in that area?
No, he's no longer owns the property on which to mine. And that was a good thing too, because that Big Bear Creek is one of the more pristine tributaries to the San Miguel River here. So, but we always thought it was a crapshoot. It was more of a threat, more of a, hey, buy me out or else, kind of like a Tom Chapman thing.
Gotcha. Great. Any other questions? Great. Well, thanks, Steve. Thanks for that information. It was a compelling process, it sounds like,
sure,
to get to that
if
point.
anyone would like more information on the peak naming effort, you could look at my website, and I guess it's on my email that I sent to you, Julie and Steve. Okay. Maybe you could flash that or something, but it kind of tells the backstory. And the reason I'm so glad we did a congressional designation is it allowed us to bring in his partner, Chris Boskoff, first American woman first woman to own or co-own an international guiding organization, electrical engineer, highly qualified. But she didn't have a significant contacts with Colorado. And so USGS name board would not have approved a peak for her, possibly for Charlie, if we got an exception around the wilderness, which I didn't think was likely. So, I could have worked on, more substantive conservation efforts. I'm pleased that the bill was passed as part of the John Dingell Public Lands Act with over 100 different public land conservation bills in it. And it's just kind of icing on the cake.
Do you have any thoughts about the renaming of Mount Evans?
I haven't looked into that very much, but Evans has what, a KKK history, is that right?
Yeah, I think of a number of issues.
Right. And, do we erase history? It's one thing to name an unnamed peak. It's another to change a name on a on a historically named peak. I haven't read enough to know how heinous he was, membership versus, active leadership and participation. But if he was a leader in there, then, I think it's fair to really consider renaming that peak. It's just part of a legacy we have to we have to stamp it out.
Well, Steve, thanks again so much for joining us tonight. We're
You're
gonna,
most welcome.
yeah.
I might hang on a little bit.
Please do. Please join us for, as long as you can.
Yeah. And I want to thank Steve for all his work on state trails and OHV grant funding and so forth. And we've had a client at Dunton Hot Springs that's been very interested in preserving quiet use in some of the mountains between the Dolores and West Dolores. And Steve's work has been very helpful in helping us track some of that, as well as Jimbo Buckaroo at San Juan Citizens Alliance. So.
Great. Well, thanks again for joining us.
Yeah.
We'll pivot now and next hear from Kara Doyle. She's with the Mosquito Range Heritage Initiative out of Park County and has been, working on public land issues of many kinds for a number of years. But Kara, I'll let you do kind of a full introduction and talk a little bit about the work you're doing in Park County.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for putting it with my wrangling. I didn't mean to worry you, Steve. I was wrangling a 10-year-old and trying to get ready at the same time. So,
right.
And thank you for inviting me and letting me join you folks tonight. Gosh, this probably came back. This was less planned, I think, than Steve Johnson's background. I got here in 1996 to work for the Forest Service for one summer and go back home. So like so many, fall came, I was broke, I liked the mountains and was just settling in, and I stayed. So none of this was actually intended. I have a master's in agricultural journalism, and I came out to write about water for the South Park Ranger districts and volunteer at the Wilkerson Pass area. And so in my time here, and as time went on, I came to become more and more passionate about the mountains and see what was happening in Summit County, and feeling like we had an opportunity to have a say over the mountains, but we really didn't. And so this was really I don't know if you can get more grassroots. This was like sitting around having a beer, looking at the mountains and going, oh my gosh, what's going to happen here? And how many people are going to buy this place and put in their second and third houses, and will they be engaged, and what will happen to this town as we know it in Alma and this area as we know it. And I feel like we take the mountains so for granted. If you live in our area, it's I guess I feel like I come at it maybe a little different perspective. It's where we walk every day. It's where we walk our dogs. It's where we get our firewood. It's where families gather and go hiking. And to me, while the 14ers are very important here, and certainly we've worked very hard on them, it's honestly a lot of the lower trails are what the local folks really travel and care about and get so much of making their living, getting their basic necessities. And it was like, oh my gosh, we have absolutely no say of what happens to the mountains that we count so much on. So we started out as a group who just wanted to figure out how to take care of these mountains and have some kind of say in it. The 14ers really hit the news. They were closed. And that was back, oh my gosh, like 16, 17 years ago. The owners, the Ribers, were trying to get the liability laws changed. Actually sat with them at the state legislature while they were trying to get the laws changed as part of a group way back when. And it kind of passed, but didn't. It got changed at the last minute and didn't meet their hopes and expectations. But we had started out just to work on trails, a little group. We were under the Alma Foundation. And I realized that the problem was much bigger. than what the group could do until we had a little more clout. So we split off from the Alma Foundation and became the Mosquito Range Heritage Initiative. CMC was in those original meetings, and CFI and 40 different partners gathered to try to figure out what to do and start out and write our strategic plan. So I don't know why, but I was just passionate about it, and I felt like we needed to matter. And so nobody wanted to do the legal stuff and all the nonprofit stuff and all the organizing and bylaws and, you know, all the garbage that you have to do to be a nonprofit and exist in the world, and create a board and all those things. So that became my work, and then starting to write grants. So I was a freelance writer and photographer, and ended up becoming a grant writer, largely because of the need in Alma, and largely because of our concern about what happened to these mountains. So that was way back when. I'm proud to say we're still in existence. We're still tiny. We still struggle, but we are still here, and we have done a lot. So we were part of the initial work in creating a legal trail to Lincoln and Democrat, and working with the Forest Service and trying to make that happen, as well as your group and quite a number of others, and making all those legal things happen while still working with the private landowners. And I have to say, I've seen both sides. If you sit with them, they tell you stories of broken windows and broken gates, and their signs being shot out, and kids being boosted into their mine in really unsafe places, and places that they see people walking that they know you can see the roots underground. So I've seen that, and the damage they talk about. I will never forget Maury talking about the story of the guy who he pulled up and had a truck full of old wood, and it turns out it was the historic boarding house that this man had pulled down and loaded up on his truck to take it away. So I feel for their struggles, and I also feel for certainly the other side and all of the access issues. And we try to do both. And as you know, that's kind of a thankless task, and it's very difficult. But Mosquito Range Heritage Initiative, sorry, my cat is here to assist me right now. There's nothing like working from home. You'll probably see my 10-year-old pop in as well. But through the years, so we've been existent as a nonprofit since 2007. We have done a ton of conservation work, and I would say the 14ers continue to be important, but really in that interim, what's become important also is, I mean, this is the watershed. It's the watershed for the South Platte, for the Arkansas, for the blue that goes into the Colorado. This is where our drinking water comes from. This is where our firewood comes from. This is where our education programs go off on all these different forest trails. So I feel like so we have Colorado, we have Lincoln, Democrat, Ross, Cameron, and it's so funny because I know everybody calls them DeCalibran, but we don't. I've never heard a local say that. I've only heard people from other hiking groups call it that. I didn't even know what it was after running this nonprofit for like 13 years. Now I know. That's what folks call it. But I think as a local, you might climb one, but more often, if you're going to hike a 14er, it's because you have visitors. So you're entertaining guests from somewhere else who've always wanted to hike a 14er. And so that's when it becomes a big deal. But economically, it's very, very important to our area. It definitely brings people to our area, and it's important money-wise to the community. We worked years ago to do the economic studies that happened to try to figure out, what do people who climb 14ers spend in our area? I hate to say it, a lot of times one of our issues is they all come, they hike there, and then they go stay somewhere else. So if you've been to Alma and Fairplay, you know that there are a whole heck of a lot of places to stay and to eat. There are a few, and thanks to those who stop and frequent those, but honestly, a lot of people come and they hike in our area and they leave. They don't become members. They don't leave money to the nonprofits who are trying to fix the damage that are created. And they often stay in Summit County, or they go back to the Front Range. So I feel like we're kind of in this really unique position of, we're trying to do good work. We're trying to educate people. We're trying to fix the trails that become damaged. We have significant rare alpine plant programs. but we find that people come from elsewhere, they call it something else, they hike in our area and they leave. So I'm hoping that we can change some of that and create more awareness. And I'm so grateful to some of these groups now that we're working with. So now 14ers are back in the news. Decalibrant has been closed lately, and that hits the news again. I think we feel for John and why he's closing it. We get it. The damage this last year has been extensive. Hiking went up, I think CFI said about 25% more on Democrat, increased by like 200% on Sherman. And the damage is incredible. And it's seemed like the folks in the last year were less maybe knowledgeable about hiking in the mountains and left more damage and didn't have those leave no trace concepts. So we're left with a pretty big mess. And we're looking for funding, and we're going to keep doing our conservation work and keep fixing trails and keep doing habitat restoration. But also right now there's some kind of cool stuff, and I don't know how much it's hit the news. I don't think it's hit the news a whole lot, but a lot of the properties on Sherman, and I will, can you help me share screen, Julie? If I put this up, I don't know if I can share it or not. You can let me know.
You should be.
I will let you know. So one of the projects we're working on is there's a significant amount of mining claims that are in bankruptcy court right now. There are also a number of landowners who, because of the damage more recently, are just kind of tired of it. It's become really discouraging. It's frustrating. The liability issues are incredible. There's a ton of great stuff up there to mine, but the expense of mining it makes it so that maybe it's not worth that. And so there are mine owners coming up who are interested in selling, and the amount of property right now is significant. So we have just gotten a grant to do some of the pre-acquisition work that needs to happen to consider purchasing a lot of these properties. It totals nearly 5,000 acres. So once again, the 14ers are back in my world, but also all the really cool stuff in between. So all the rare plant areas, all the wetlands, our water sources, all of these different pieces and parts are part of it. In the meantime, let me tell you a little bit about it. It's nearly 5,000 claims. And what our attempt is to do the pre-acquisition work. So that would be the land title work, the geology appraisals, the general appraisals, environmental assessments, all of the pieces and parts that we need to do to try to be able to purchase this land. So we'll do this work this summer. There's a whole group of us that are working on this. Mosquito Range Heritage Initiative is in the middle part of trying to help organize. I sent it to Julie. And the hope is by August that we have this work completed, and then we'll go to federal land and water funds to work on purchasing it. So we're working with the Conservation Fund, and the hope is that then we will be able to purchase this land and ultimately within the next 3 to 4 years, have it go to Forest Service. So we want it all to be public lands. It will not extend the boundaries of the Forest Service as we know it here, the Silk Park Ranger District. But what it is, all of these claims are within the district for the most part. There's some on BLM property at some of the peaks. But the hope is that then all of these parcels that are tucked in within the district will then become public as well. So that will not only impact the Reds to the 14ers in our area, but also a lot of the other land and trails that I have mentioned that are so important locally to us. So that's the first big thing. We have a $100,000 grant to launch. There we go. I apologize for my lack of technology tonight. I had it ready to go, but it wouldn't come up. So here's what we're looking at. So as Lincoln Democrat, Bross, Cameron, and Sherman essentially are all impacted in this. We are intentionally not putting names or really exact boundaries because, as you know, that can get a little bit touchy and not everybody will be as excited about this becoming public land as perhaps we are. But you can see how significant the number of parcels are and how many potential trails that impacts, as well as so many of the wetlands and little local trails and things that we cherish. It's a significant amount of area that is in rare plant areas that we study. So here's our goal. Here are the parcels that we are hoping to be able to get. We will be doing all these assessments this summer. We have to make sure that because they've been mined, that they are still parcels that the Forest Service will accept. And so that is our summer challenge. And the other exciting piece is we have applied for coalition money for the Parks and Wildlife Grant. And CMC is one piece of that coalition, because we realize that this area it's immense. It needs a lot of planning. There are other property holders that perhaps will come out of the woodwork, and if you have quietly, to see what other properties can we get and how do we figure out what's most important? How do we prioritize this? How do you pick one over the other? And then of course, how do you get the money for all this? And if we get it, how do we clean up the properties? How do we connect all the trails, do the kind of restoration work that we need to do? So that's where we are right now. It's gigantic. We are tiny, but we are grateful for your help and we hope you will support us. I'm pretty excited. This is probably everything that we set out hoping to do initially. I never imagined in a million years 5,000 acres would come up all at once, but we are hopeful. So that's probably enough for me for now.
Great. Thanks so much, Kara. That was great. Really appreciate your perspective, especially as a local living in these communities that are impacted by, you know, both the recreation potential, but also the impact from that. Any questions for Kara?
Do you have to get buy-in from all of the landowners in order to make it happen? I guess that's my first question. The second question is, what is the probability that all of this will happen? Are we like 90% confident?
Well, if you could tell me that, it will be in good shape. Essentially, this is a group of properties owned by companies currently in bankruptcy court, a related group of companies. It's a small group, and 2 private landowners. That's it. So this doesn't take into accord like any other owners with property in the area. It's literally just these 3 groups. So it's a little more doable than it sounds like probably from the outside. I think the likelihood of getting every single one of those is small, but I think the likelihood of getting the bulk of those is actually looking very promising at the moment. You know, of course, anyone like Steve Johnson was talking about, I mean, if you get one determined person who has a gob of money who just starts buying things out, if they beat us to the punch, that's tough. But the Conservation Fund has got pretty significant backing. And so what we're trying to do is say, look, yes, you could sell these off one at a time, but we could come in and buy them all at once. And because of that, that could be a nice incentive for a landowner, a mine owner, because they may be able to sell some of them quite easily, but some may not be very appealing. So the hope is that they will allow us to buy them all together, and that gives them the incentive to work with us.
And a clarifying question in the chat, all the yellow properties on the map are the ones that you're looking to purchase?
Correct.
Okay, thanks.
Don't tell everybody.
Steve Johnson's got a question. Oh, Steve, you're muted.
Oh, can you hear me? Okay. So first of all, congratulations. I'm grateful to see a local grassroots organization taking on this land acquisition challenge. And it shouldn't just all be the national heavyweights with no real connection to find where the value is. Wilson Peak was much simpler in comparison. And it was, yes, some conservation concerns about potential mining, which we felt was a long shot, but really, you know, we could focus on the peak, and you've got all these properties. I would just say that these landowners, if they're smart, will try and seek releases of liability for any future, you know, cleanup liability. And so where does that leave the responsibility? And make sure, my suggestion is, if you haven't already, that Forest Service is willing to take that on as a potential recipient, and make sure that you've got the backstop in their resource or their forest plan that calls for them to take an active role in, you know, in leading and or cooperating with remedial actions on those properties, as well as protection of the wetlands. Of course, that's easy to say, but significant mapping, you know, and follow up, you know, adaptive management and all that kind of stuff. They've got to really be ready to step up to the plate in order for you to put your money down and say, okay, we'll buy it and transfer it to you. And I don't know what, maybe you can address, you know, what their position has been on that.
We're working as a group. So we have the Conservation Fund, the Colorado 14ers Initiative are involved, the Forest Service. They have been in conversations on a regional level, and I think behind the scenes on probably a national level.
Yeah, no doubt.
We have, yeah, we have, they seem at a regional level to be very excited about the prospects of this. There have also been conversations with the BLM, because some of the pieces on top could involve and do on certain peaks involve the BLM. So they have also shown an interest. We are not fundraising and buying these peaks. I will tell you, we are fundraising so that I can get paid for some of it, because I have put in hundreds of unpaid hours to make this happen. So when I talk about all of these big groups coming in, playing and leaving, I'm not kidding. You know, we are left with a lot of these challenges, and we don't have the pockets that many of these groups do. Our community is relatively low income. Most people are working 2 or 3 jobs. A lot of them are in the service industry in Summit County. You know, they even have a very limited amount of time they can volunteer. So when you talk grassroots, I mean, this is literally like the seeds that we are trying to make happen. But this is just something so unbelievable to even have the chance to try. So one of my board members has a master's from School of Mines. And she is qualified to go out and do a lot of the environmental assessments. We've already done a lot of them on Sherman. We did them last year. We knew about the bankruptcy things then. And we now, because of this grant, have the funding to send her out with the Forest Service person who will do these initial environmental assessments. Then we have the money for an environmental engineer to do all the checking and stamping and further kind of detailed mapping that they'll need. So because this is going to go to federal land and water grant proposal, we have to meet the requirements of that federal kind of all the crossing T's and dotting I's that the federal area would expect. So we're having to do more detailed work up front with the hope of qualifying for that grant money down the line. But the Forest Service absolutely is like holding our hand, and we're talking on a almost, you know, daily or weekly basis about, you know, what did we find? What have we checked? We have a lot of water surveying that we have done in the past with the Coalition for the Upper South Platte. So we have a lot of the detailed water testing already of a lot of these mining properties. And we've already done a lot of looking ahead, so we already know what we're getting into in most cases. And certainly it has to pass muster or we won't be able to take it. So we're doing a lot of due diligence in advance, knowing that they will not take it if this isn't done. They have to know exactly what they're looking at and say yes or no.
One follow-up. Just a quick
Steve, do you want
follow-up.
to come on?
Yeah, just, and that's great. It sounds like, it sounds like the Forest Service is interested and wants to help you qualify or help it qualify for the Land and Water Conservation Grant funding. In 1975, I think it was, I took an 200 level entomology course and went up to Alma, and I studied the aquatic insects, even though I wasn't a fly fisherman at the time. And I looked at the diversity of aquatic invertebrates, larvae, above and below the wastewater treatment plant discharge point. And I found a whole lot of good mayflies and everything else upstream, and a lot of Diptera black flies right downstream. But I don't have a copy of that anymore. So.
I was going to ask you for a copy.
Great. Well, thanks, Kara. If there are other questions for Kara, maybe put those in the chat. We're going to keep moving so we can kind of stay on track here. But yeah, really appreciate you providing an update in the map. But yeah, the map is super helpful. So I'm glad we got that to work. And yeah, thanks again to Steve and Kara. And Steve, I wanted to just confirm it's okay to share the resources that you sent to me earlier.
Of course.
Okay.
Yes, and I have much more.
Okay.
You know, that was probably one of 200 communications on Wilson Peak.
Okay, great. We'll get that emailed out.
I can share the Fowler Peak, but just there's a link in my website.
Okay.
On that. That was noteworthy. Thank you.
Great.
I'm going to leave.
Okay. Thanks, Steve. Thanks.
Bye all. Keep up the good work.
Thanks. Okay, so I'm going to pass it over now to Steve Banowski, who's going to tell us a little bit about some of the work he's done down in the Stingrays and elsewhere.
Okay, thanks, Julie. And I'll kind of go through this semi-rapidly. I'm technically challenged right now, so I did not call up a map for this, but we're not going to be looking at mining claims as Steve and Kara did. We're going to be looking more at landscapes. And so we'll be talking about the east side of the San Luis Valley from the town of Crestone down to Blanca Peak, and with the Great Sand Dunes National Park and Preserve right in the middle. And I think we do have a special guest on with us tonight. There's someone down there named Christine. And if that's who I think it is, that is Christine Canali. Chris is a longtime partner of the CMC. She's the longtime executive director of the San Luis Valley Ecosystem Council, SILVEC, which is based in Alamosa. And I was privileged to work on a couple of these projects with her. And like any other access issue, as Kara has testified to us, they go on forever and ever. They seem to get a life of their own. I'll hit briefly on two of them. One was an access project for the club running from roughly 2009 to 2013, involving two trails south of the town of Crestone that ran up into the Sangre de Cristo wilderness. One was the Spanish Peak Trail that went up to the drainage between Kit Carson and Crestone Peak and kind of dead ended there. The other one was the Cottonwood Creek Trail that went up Cottonwood Creek and then branched off to the south face of Crestone Peak. A wonderful view of the Red Couloir, which is a really fun climb. In my stronger and more healthy days, I did it 4 times, but only twice with the brutal backpack. So we switched here from mining claims to dealing with religious groups, which was kind of an interesting perspective for me, because I had worked in the early 2000s on the Lincoln Bross Democrat with Kara and the property owners when we went to the legislature. And then right about the time Wilson Peak was winding down, the town of Crestone and the Sangres popped up. Now, what made these two trails interesting is that the first one coming south out of town on the high road, which was a public road, but eventually turned over to private road. The Spanish Creek Trail was on the trailhead, and the first half mile or so of the trail was on the property of the Crestone Zen Center. And they did not dislike hikers. They liked hikers, but with the 14er craze coming on in the 2000s, they were getting too many people trying to do that trail. And it was disturbing the meditative environment that they tried to create for their clients. And one of the issues with that trail that worked in everyone's behalf was that it didn't go anywhere. It just ran up the valley and kind of dead ended at a wall. And if you looked up to your right or to the south, you'd see something of Crestone Peak. If you looked up to your left, well, you might have been able to scramble up to the Kit Carson Highway and do the peak from there. There was also a lot of downed timber on that trail. So one thing we did, and actually I was representing the club then, so I was working with our conservation directors, starting with Claire Bastable, then to Brian Martin, and finally with Scott Braden. We decided to blow off the Spanish Creek Trail. It wasn't something that we were going to really want to use in the future. We'd keep the Crestone Zen Center happy. And with this kind of work, even though it was a state project, we did check in with the El Pueblo group, the Pikes Peak group, also the Denver group, which were the chapters of the club that were closest, letting them know what we were doing, what the rationale was. And I don't recall that we got any pushback from anybody. And so we put all our marbles, so to speak, on the Cottonwood Creek Trail, which is about 1.5 miles further to the south. That trailhead was also privately owned. Part of it was on the Baca Grande Water and Sanitation District, and they had a big storage tank there and some purification processes there, because Cottonwood Creek was part of the water supply for the local area. And then the rest of it was on the private property of the Manitou Institute and Preserve, which was not so much a religious group, but it was more of an environmental preservation entity. But the road continued up to the Shumai, which I think was another form of Tibetan Buddhism. And so we were working with those folks. There were problems at the trailhead, limited parking, people camping there. There were no official campsites, human waste getting into what was going to be the water supply down for the town of Crestone. And so we needed to work through all of that. Also, people were chopping down trees for campfires. So we went through a multi-year process, and unfortunately we changed conservation directors in 2013, and that person had some different priorities. And so the club basically left that. But in checking on 14ers.com, that trailhead is now managed by the Forest Service. So we had local people involved. We had the local land conservancy, the BLM was involved, the Forest Service, Saguache Ranger District was involved. And we spent probably a good 4 years going back and forth. We weren't meeting every week. Generally about every 2 to 3 months, we'd have a meeting, and there was a lot of email exchange going around. So it was an interesting process, and well, all I can say is it was different. And then going down to the south was a project from the late 90s, and this was the Como Lake Road, which is arguably, probably not arguably, it is the hardest Jeep road in Colorado. To go all the way up to the end of it, features a couple of items, some rock areas called Jaws 1 and Jaws 2, because they will grasp your Jeep and chew it up and throw it down the hillside. And sad to say, that's almost literal, because there have been fatalities on that road. I led Little Bear and Blanca over Labor Day weekend of 2000, and couldn't figure out why nobody was coming up to Como Lake. Well, it turned out Alamosa County Sheriff had closed the road because there had been a rollover down by Jaws 1 and a double fatality, sadly. And so the road was closed for a while. The issue here was that the Forest Service went through a process because there was an incredible amount of environmental damage going up toward around Como Lake and going higher if you've been in that drainage. And the surface was fairly stable, but that part ended at the west end of Como Lake. So the Forest Service District Ranger, it's the Conejos Peak Ranger District that's based in La Jara, which is a small town south of Alamosa going down 285 toward Antonito in New Mexico. They had proposed to close that road. It was appealed to the regional forester in Monte Vista. He upheld the decision, went to the regional forester in Lakewood at the time, and that decision was upheld. So it looked like we were going to get that road closed. The important part of it for the motorized community would remain, and the part that was damaged would basically be closed and subject to restoration. Unfortunately, the district ranger took a promotion to the regional office and brought a new guy in, and he was lobbied heavily, shall we say, by the motorized community. And so he basically declined to implement the decision. And the problem we had with that is that the district ranger never informed any other stakeholders. And that included the Colorado Mountain Club, included San Luis Valley Ecosystem Council, and some other entities. And I found out about it quite by accident, like about 2 years later. Vera Smith, who was our longtime conservation director for about 7 years back in early to mid 2000s, I didn't see her get upset too often, but she was over that one. And I know she had some, at a later meeting, she had some very positive, proactive, but very pointed conversations with the regional forester in Monte Vista. And so I haven't been down there for a while. The Jeepers Creepers group from Durango had adopted that road, try to keep it cleaned up. When I first went down there 30 years ago, we kind of joked that you could build a brand new used Jeep from all the auto parts that you'd find on that road that fallen off of cars, mufflers, flat tires, broken axles, things like that. So, and it's a heck of a backpack because you're coming up in the heat of the day. But so that's kind of a little bit of the history we've done with this type of access work. We also worked on Calabria Peak, but I'll leave that for a different time, Julie. And it's been a privilege for me over this 20 plus years of site-specific access work to be able to do this for the club. And I'm trusted to do it. I've worked very hard to earn and keep that trust, and working with a long line of conservation directors. And it's been a privilege to work with all of those folks. And so right now I'm doing some work with Julie on Lincoln Bross Democrat, maybe a little bit on Sherman as that comes up. And I'll kind of turn it back over to you, Julie, at this point in time, if you want to talk a little bit about the plans for LBD in the next couple months and whatever you want to talk about. And then I'll come back with some local updates.
Great. Sounds good. Thanks, Steve. Yeah, just, I think a lot of folks on this call are probably aware that we've been working with the landowners on Democrat Lincoln Bross area, the DeCalibron, for lack of a better term. And currently the sort of status there is that the private parcels, including the peaks of Democrat and Bross, are technically closed to public access, and that went into effect, I think it was May 1st of this year, primarily over concerns regarding liability. The landowner is working on getting a private insurance policy to help kind of buffer his personal liability. Normally he works with the town of Alma through a lease agreement there. So they're working through some of those issues, and we hope the peaks will be open soon as we get into hiking season. I think there's still snow up there, so we're not quite there yet, but yeah, we're continuing to work with those landowners so we can hopefully get access restored. But then one of the other things we're hoping to do this summer is provide some of the kind of outreach and education and user engagement that we hope will help educate folks and help kind of minimize the impacts of having people up on these peaks and just on public lands in general, by providing essentially almost like a trailhead ambassador program. So we will be actually looking for volunteers to help out with this. We may pair you up with a staff member or with Steve, or somebody who's kind of been trained and understands the issues up there. But really the goal is, and we did this once in 2020, is to hang out at the peaks probably on a weekend, starting around 5:30 as people are getting up and starting to hike, and doing a couple of things. One, just talking with folks, also getting numbers, understanding how many people are hiking up there, how many cars are in the lot, and then also doing some surveying and getting information from users about where they're coming from and how they got information about the 14ers and whether or not they know that the peaks are private or that Ross is closed to public and that sort of thing. So we'll be doing that kind of trailhead ambassador and survey work again this summer. So keep an eye out probably in the next week or so for some information about how to get involved and volunteer if you're interested in doing that. So, again, in addition to the work we're doing kind of behind the scenes with the landowners, there's some I think on the ground opportunities for folks to get involved and helping with that education this year.
And Julie, I'll just throw in that we already have several people signed up to do that work. I know Shannon, who's on the call tonight, Elizabeth Morgan and Jeremiah Hool could not be here tonight, but they are both very interested in this process also. Yeah. So we've got several already there, and we'll be happy to add more.
Cool. Thanks, Steve. Yeah, just a couple other quick updates on my end. For those who have been following or have heard about the Keep Colorado Wild Pass, this is the bill that's been in the state legislature with a proposal to replace the annual state parks pass with basically a license fee that is associated with your vehicle registration each year. That bill has passed through the legislature and is going to the governor's desk for signature pretty soon, sometime within the next week, I think. And it's a pretty big win, I think, from a conservation perspective and a recreation perspective. So, if you already buy an annual state parks pass, the proposed pass will be half the price, potentially cheaper, so under $40 for that pass, and it'll be essentially an opt-out program. So if you're not interested, you don't plan to visit state parks, you can opt out of it. But they're hoping to have a pretty high volume of engagement at that lower price point, and it should generate a ton more funding for Colorado State Parks, as well as some other kind of additional tiers of funding for Colorado Search and Rescue, the Colorado Avalanche Information Center, and then a number of other kind of education and DEI programs that CPW is getting off the ground. None of this will go into effect until 2023 at the earliest. They have to get all the admin components kind of in place. So buy your Parks Pass if you need it for this year and next year. But then looking into 2023, it should just be a kind of automatic add-on to your vehicle registration. So we may be sending out just kind of an action alert to thank the sponsors of that bill and do a little kind of press and outreach around the signage once it's signed into law. But yeah, it's a win, I think, in the Colorado State Legislature for that pass. Other than that, I don't have a ton more. We are in the midst of our stewardship cruise season. So we have trail crews that are running. They just finished their training at the end of May, and now they're on the ground. We actually have both crews down in the Sangres, one on the east side going up the South Colony Trail, which is a 14er access trail, and then another crew on South Zapata, which is down just south of the sand dunes. So they're out doing trail work, trying to get these trails cleared before the hiking season really gets underway. And they'll be, like I said, working all over the state. So keep an eye out. We'll have blogs and photos and updates on where those guys are working this year. But I think those are the big updates that I've got for now. So Steve, I'll kick it back to you for any Denver group updates, unless there's anything I've totally forgotten.
Well, there's probably things you've forgotten, but you do so much. it's hard to keep track of all the balls you're juggling in the air. So appreciate that very much. Let's run quickly through some Denver stuff, and then I'll have a couple of announcements at the end. Shannon, do you want to update us anything on Jeffco and put in that pitch for more help?
Always need more help. Always need more help. Nothing much to say. I took a look back through my notes. I guess we've been continually going to Jeffco open space meetings for about 2 years now, so that's great. I know they really appreciate it and look forward to our input on quite a few things. So, you know, like South Table Mountain, Elder Furor, I don't know if I'm saying that right. Three Sisters, we provided input on that. Beaver Ranch, I went to that meeting and it was about the fastest meeting I've ever seen. They're going to do good things there, but that's the bottom line on that one. I also appreciate when people pipe up and let us know, well, mainly Steve know about when you see signs going up for development anywhere in Jeffco, let us know, please, because sometimes they're just signs posted in the neighborhood. I am now on every single alert available, including things that involve kids, and I don't even have kids for Jeffco open space. So if I ever see anything interesting, I will forward it along. And yes, the first Thursday of every month, usually Jeffco open space has a meeting. They're virtual if anybody wants to help out and take the meeting minutes. It's a low lift, and I know I appreciate it. That's my yoga night. I'm willing to give that up once in a while, but not all the time. So that's it for me.
Okay, thanks, Shannon. Any questions for Shannon? Okay, Jim, you want to toss anything in about Douglas County open space?
Yeah, well, nothing has been officially blessed yet. I mean, based on all the commissioners' work, working through minutia on what a open space tax extension might look like, you know, all the details, share back, how much, how long. You know, we wouldn't be doing this if it weren't going to be on the ballot this November. So they have to notify the elections board that they're going to put something on the ballot in July. So I'm sure there'll be some kind of official endorsement or approval. And then the final wording on the ballot measure, it has to be done in September. So, you know, say, well, it's not official yet. I mean, but the fact that they're working the details and minutia and even looking at proposed ballot language tells me that, you know, it's likely. There was a county survey done and 79% of the respondents wanted to see the sales tax extended. Half of them wanted to see it extended indefinitely or permanently. So, you know, very positive atmosphere right now to do this, to get an extension. And the other thing is we're bringing Trust for Public Lands in on this to help us with a campaign. Last year, they were involved with 80 different open space sales tax initiatives, and all 80 of them won. So again, you know, it looks like everything is moving towards something on the ballot this November for extending the sales tax here in Douglas County.
Okay, Jim, thanks for that update, and do keep us informed. We, as a 501c3 tax exempt organization, CMC does not get into political campaigns, but we can endorse ballot initiatives.
Okay.
And this is one I think we will definitely want to discuss it. Probably not need too long of a discussion, Julie, but this is one we'll want to get behind and give our weight to it, and also get a little PR for the club too. So any questions for Jim? Okay, got a couple of quick items. With the South Platte Ranger District, several of you have attended outside 285 briefings. That's starting to wind down. I've asked that we be kept involved in the info loop for stuff going forward in Buffalo Creek, East Buffalo Creek. That's the area down around Long Scraggy, and then going over toward the confluence of the South Platte. Haven't heard anything back from Brandon Mitchell, who is their wilderness and trails guy. We do have a field trip coming up on June 29th to go up and look at the Geneva Basin area and possible hiker only trail up there. Shannon will be on that. Julie's coming up for it. I'll be there. I think Grover will be there, since he better be, since it's his idea. And we can probably squeeze in one or two more. We will have CPW representatives there. And one of the facilitators from outside 285 is also coming. And let's see, in way of announcements coming forward, we don't have any more meetings scheduled until September and December. We don't have dates yet, don't have topics. If you have something you want to learn about or hear about or bring somebody else back who's spoken to us before, but it's been several years, and don't hesitate to contact me. And because we want to make sure we're getting information out to you folks that you feel is useful. And so we do record, so there will be other people who aren't here tonight being able to see what happens. Thinking about another tailgate social at the CMC parking lot, maybe around the end of July. So about another 6 weeks. And there's a little bit of talk about a possible camp out, Denver Conservation camp out at the end of August. And so we'll keep you informed and updated on that. Sandy, do you want to add anything from Denver Group Council perspective?
No, thanks for asking, Steve, but I don't have anything at the moment.
Okay, great. And Phil and I, and maybe Shannon, are going to give a 6-month update to council on Wednesday evening. Shannon's kind of shaking her head. Did I forget to mention that to you?
Well, I think you did. And then I also think I have the navigation one, field day pre-work at the same time.
Okay, that does happen. And
Looks like it's gonna be you and me, Steve.
looks that way because Dave Litke, Jim Guerra, and Grover are out on a backpack surveying campsites down in the Lost Creek Wilderness.
Yep.
And I
No
think Mark
offense,
Freimeyer
Sandy.
is probably going to kill me. It's taken me like 4 months to get through 6 hours of online training, which is actually pathetic, very pathetic. And I finally finished the other day, and I need to do it.
Well, I feel for you. I just renewed my wilderness first aid, and that was an experience. But anybody else want to add anything? Oh, before I forget it, I don't have any updates, Sam and Jennifer, on Devil's Head. And I will see if I can get something from Brandon in the next few days on that, because that had kind of fallen through the cracks in my world. And also Jim and Garrett is involved in that too. So we'll see if there's anything happening there that would be of interest or that we should take up. So if there's no other comments, let me turn it back to Julie to take us home, shall we say.
Thanks, Steve. Yeah, I think we're wrapping for tonight, but thank you everybody for joining us this evening. Yeah, if you have any other questions that you want to route to Kara or to Steve Johnson, feel free to email me and we can try to get answers for you, and we'll send around some of the resources that they shared. And yeah, make sure you guys have what you need. But thanks again for joining tonight, and we'll see you all soon.